Hello everyone. For those who have been keeping up with my videos, you will probably know that we have moved into a new house this summer, and as is appropriate, whenever you move into a new house, you should name it. So that's what this video is about the name that we came up with for our house. So, and of course, because we know the names in multiple languages here, because of our different studies, so let's get into the names. So the name in English is the House of Books and Games, and as you can see, I'm filming this in front of some of our bookshelves that we have here to underscore that theme. We also have a lot of board games as well, so that's kind of the derivation of the name, in addition to probably trying to host different game nights and things like that, as well as being a place where we read a lot. So the House of Books and Games works well for the basic title in English. Next up is Spanish, which is a language that my wife speaks in addition to English, and the name in Spanish is La Casa de Libros y Juegos. So that's a pretty basic, straightforward translation there of the House of Books and Games. And then we get into the Latin is the next language that we'll look at for the name. So these are ones that I came up with. So there's actually two that I've come up with Latin. One is kind of more traditional, like how modern interpretation of the words books and games works. So that name is Domus Ludorum et Librorum. So I've switched up the order there from, instead of it being books and games, it's games and books in Latin. But that was just because it kind of sounded better to me, I thought. Ludorum et Librorum rather than Librorum et Ludorum. So there's another version in Latin as well, because when the word that gets translated games in Latin is usually referring more to like public games, for example, like when they did the gladiatorial games or the chariot races. Today it would be more like probably like a football game or a major sporting event, or it could even have included, back then they usually had a lot of almost like a fair or something where you have games but also shows going on. So that's not really the type of thing we mean when we say games. When we're talking about this house, we're talking more about board games and things like that, which there were some in Latin, but usually they just would refer to a specific game, not really have a general term for board games. The same thing goes for books, right? So Librorum is a fine translation of book, but technically there's the Codex, which is what we think of when we think of a book, right? It's just a book with covers, kind of like this, right? Your basic pages, and that's versus, for example, something like a scroll or any other kind of tablet writing. And by tablet, I mean like wax tablets, not like your iPad. Therefore, there is an alternate translation that I've come up with, which I think gets better at what kind of books and games I'm talking about here. The problem is why I wouldn't necessarily put that one on a sign or something if I was going to put it up around my house, is because when you put that other one into Google Translate, it translates to the House of Codes and Gambling, because most of the tabletop games they did were gambling games, and it just translates the form of codex that I put in, because you have to change the form of the words in Latin, right, to indicate different relationships between the words. So when you put in that particular form of it, Google Translate gets confused and thinks you're talking about codes instead of plural codex, the plural of codex. So anyway, so that title in Latin would be Domus Codicum Aliarumque. And so that's the one that would, I think, actually be more historically accurate, but it also would, well, let me say, it wouldn't necessarily be more historically accurate, but it'd be more accurate description of what we mean when we call our house the House of Books and Games. So yes, so that's the two Latin ones. And then lastly, we have a Greek version of the name, and the Greek was a little tricky because the different way that the words relate to each other, there wasn't really a good way to say house of books and games without it sounding like the books and the games were like the owners of the house, if we just use kind of the standard version of how you translate of. So instead I've gone with the house or the home having books and games. So the home that has books and games, basically. I felt like was a more accurate way to say this in Greek to get the meaning across. So that name is He Echusa Agonas Kai Sungramata He Hestia. Okay, so now you know how to say the name of our house in 4 different languages. Hopefully that's been a little bit of interest to you guys, seeing how you can even just translate a simple phrase into different languages. And also, cool, we have a house and it's of books and games, and that's great. Thanks for watching.